8 Biggest Similarities Between Yellowstone and Territory. Netflix's latest Western series, Territory, bears a notable resemblance to Paramount's Yellowstone, and there are several reasons why. Taylor Sheridan's neo-Western has been one of the most popular TV shows in recent years, regarded for the performances from its all-star cast, including Kevin Costner's leading role. While the Western genre seems to have faded away for the time being in films, Yellowstone has paved the way for a new style of soap opera neo-Westerns on television, with Territory's Lawson family all too similar to the Duttons of the Yellowstone Ranch. It's certainly not a critique of Territory to point out its similarities to Yellowstone. It makes sense that Netflix would want to capitalize on Taylor Sheridan's success, and part of what makes Territory work is that it offers its own regional spin on it. Territory's cast is made up of Australian and New Zealand actors, providing the series with a sense of authenticity that meshes perfectly with the Northern Territory landscapes and wildlife displayed throughout the premiere 6 episodes. The dynamics and plot may be similar, but the aesthetic of Territory stands as its own. Territory is a succession story on a cattle station/ranch. In terms of their central narrative, Territory and Yellowstone are rather similar. The Lawsons and the Duttons are families who have owned their respective ranches for multiple generations, and both control some of the most enormous territories of land in their countries. The fictional Marianne Station is described in Territory as the world's largest cattle station, while the Yellowstone Ranch is one of the largest in the United States. Colin Lawson and John Dutton both inherited their ranches from their fathers, continuing a cycle. While Territory's conflict is more immediate due to the fact that Colin Lawson has somewhat retired, both shows surround an issue of succession. Colin and John both have children and grandchildren who are willing to take over the ranch, but the ideal heir is either dead or uninterested. Realizing that, without an heir, the ranches will soon be without proper leadership, exterior forces are beginning to circle Marianne Station and the Yellowstone Ranch. Thus, the conflict of both shows ensues as the Lawsons and Duttons scramble to hold their family legacy together. Territory and Yellowstone kick off after a significant family death. Both Territory and Yellowstone begin when the son, who's most involved in the family business, is killed, creating a conflict of succession. In the former, Daniel Lawson is found dead under mysterious circumstances, immediately leaving Marianne Station without leadership. In Yellowstone, Lee Dutton dies in a shootout over a cattle conflict in the opening episodes, leaving John Dutton without his loyal, ideal heir. In both cases, the death of the ideal heir causes the family to congregate for the first time in years. In Territory, Susie Lawson returns from college, and Marshall Lawson returns from his own extracurricular activities, attending Daniel's funeral and bringing the family together for the first time in years. Yellowstone starts with Beth and Kayce Dutton returning to the ranch, and Lee's death prompts John to try to persuade both of them to stick around. Meanwhile, Graham Lawson and Jamie Dutton have been present the entire time, but their fathers have very little regard for them and don't consider them as candidates to take on leadership. Territory explores how Indigenous Australians factor into the cattle business. One of the crucial subplots in Territory features an Indigenous community who have some say on the outcome of Marianne Station. Similarly, Yellowstone follows Chief Thomas Rainwater as the representative of the Broken Rock Reservation, with both shows exploring the lasting effects of colonization in their respective regions. In real life, the Northern Territory region of Australia has the most significant population of Aboriginal Australians, meaning it would be impossible to explore the area without telling their story. Both shows' opening episodes open with a dispute between the central family and an Indigenous community over the ownership of cattle. Territory examines Nolan as the primary representative of the area's cultural divide, as he's essentially learned how to play the Lawsons' game and make a decent living for himself. However, other characters like Uncle Bryce feel like he shouldn't be playing by their rules, creating an interesting push and pull that Yellowstone explores with characters like Monica and Thomas Rainwater. Both shows' opening episodes open with a dispute between the central family and an Indigenous community over the ownership of cattle, laying the foundation for important thematic undertones. Territory and Yellowstone show an aging patriarch struggling to stay in control. These are hardened, often cruel men defined by being frustratingly stubborn and set in their own ways, making their leadership notably flawed in a rapidly changing world. There are several differences between Colin Lawson and John Dutton, but they both serve an integral purpose in their respective shows. These patriarchs are the representation of how Marianne Station and Yellowstone Ranch have been managed for generations, and while their style of leadership has been effective for a long time, the cracks are beginning to show. These are hardened, often cruel men defined by being frustratingly stubborn and set in their own ways, making their leadership notably flawed in a rapidly changing world. While John Dutton is still sharp and capable of making moves to contend with the likes of Market Equities or Dan Jenkins, Colin Lawson is portrayed as being far more out of touch, having already passed on leadership of Marianne Station to his son Daniel. With that being said, Colin still seems to have a vital say in the happenings of his land, as he technically owns it. Both Territory and Yellowstone examine these nuanced characters, exploring their classical masculinity and how it affects them in the modern world. Graham Lawson tries to gain his father's approval like Jamie Dutton. The Lawson-Dutton character comparisons can go beyond Colin and John, as there are some crucial similarities between Graham Lawson and Jamie Dutton. As mentioned, Colin and John have restricted, old-fashioned views of masculinity, and that's a significant reason why they both have it out for one of their sons. In Colin's case, he seems to absolutely hate Graham despite his eldest son demonstrating a clear competence and understanding of the family business, purely because he lacks the expected exterior strength. But Graham Lawson isn't without his problems, as the character struggles with alcoholism throughout the series, preventing him from reaching his full potential. Jamie Dutton's most common vice is trying to betray his father, something that Graham would never do. So, while there is a clear distinction, both men's mental struggles are the result of decades of abuse and a lack of love from their fathers, and Colin and John hate them even more for how they react to it. They're two guys who really can't win with their fathers, at least not for very long. Marshall Lawson's story mirrors Kayce Dutton's prodigal son arc. The Territory and Yellowstone character comparisons don't stop there, as Marshall almost perfectly fits Kayce's archetype. While Marshall Lawson doesn't have a military background that makes him incredibly dangerous, he's shown in his introductory scenes to have some fight in him. The most important aspect of his character, at least to Colin, is that Marshall is tough. He's a scrappy guy who's spent years away from his family's wealthy lifestyle, learning to fend for himself. Both Marshall and Kayce have the ideal traits that Colin and John are searching for in an heir, but the biggest issue is that they don't want to be there. Their respective romantic interests, Sharni and Monica, believe that by staying involved in their family business, they're more likely to become cruel and evil. Both characters demonstrate inherent goodness, and it's possible that the corruption of the cattle industry might seep into them if they partake in it, but that's also part of what makes them such ideal candidates to lead their industries into a new era. Sandra Kirby and Market Equities try to gain control of the show's respective ranches. Major corporations are trying to take land from the Lawsons and Duttons. The biggest threat to Marianne Station and the Yellowstone Ranch are the massive corporations trying to use their land for various purposes. In Territory, Sandra Kirby is a mining magnate who wants to use Marianne's land for its uranium, which she hopes to enrich and deal overseas. In Yellowstone, Market Equities wants to use the Duttons' property to construct an airport. The major commonality here is that neither company is interested in cattle but rather in land, tying them to their respective shows' main themes. Both Marianne Station and the Yellowstone Ranch are struggling enterprises, and there's some debate in both shows as to whether the Lawson or Dutton family businesses merit such massive quantities of land. Sandra Kirby and the Market Equities Corporation essentially want to modernize the usage of that land, and both families are left to defend themselves against far wealthier economic and political opponents. In Yellowstone, a huge aspect of John Dutton's character is that he doesn't want the natural land of Montana to be ruined by such a soulless corporation. Emily Lawson married into the family, like Rip Wheeler. Emily Lawson and Rip Wheeler are the last character comparisons to be made between Territory and Yellowstone, as both have similar functions. It would be easy to compare Emily to Beth, as they're the tough, competent women in their respective series. However, Emily resembles Rip far more, as she's the outsider who's married into the family and has no proper claim to anything, but is likely the one who deserves it all the most. Of course, a major difference between the two is that Emily and Colin don't get along, while John essentially sees Rip as one of his sons. Both characters are highly competent around the ranch, respected by their peers, and seem like the most likely candidates to end up in charge when all is said and done. Territory Season 1 hasn't provided any clear answers on who will end the series on top, but given that Emily is framed as the primary protagonist, it's undoubtedly a possibility that her rags to riches story could come to fruition.